answer it for me? I can't stop what I'm doing right now and my hands are full.
Yeah! Hello, this is Kitty!
There are countless passages in the Quran encouraging the humane, dignified treatment of slaves. They encourage masters to feed them.
Hey everyone! Last time I reacted to PG's video where he compared modern work to Islamic slavery and said that because you didn't choose to be born, you have a moral right to live off your parents forever. Both videos were my personal meltdown point, but he's back. This time, he discovered Geoism, a 19th century idea about taxing land, and he presents it as the solution for Gen Z's housing crisis. Spoilers. It's the same pattern. Cherry-picked history, emotional manipulation, and zero practical mechanism. Today, I'll break down 7 key points in his video, using his own words. And I'll show you why Geoism by PG appears to be more like magic thinking rather than an actual economics, in my opinion.
This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you've seen before. At the very bottom, we have our most important fundamental survival needs like food, water, and shelter. Before we can worry about literally anything else, our basic fundamental survival needs have to be met. This is why I've also said for a long time that a young Gen Z minimum wage worker at McDonald's or Starbucks literally has it worse than a lot of Roman slaves. People used to think I was crazy for saying this, but gradually this narrative has shifted. And now there's an official scientific basis for this as well. Roman slaves may not have had legal rights and personhood, but they had their basic survival needs like food and housing covered by their masters.
PG says, Roman slaves ate and had a roof, so they had it better than a minimum wage worker today. By that logic, if food and shelter are all that matter, then a prison inmate has it great. 3 meals, a bed, no rent. Would any of you trade places with a prisoner? Hard to tell. Why? Because PG completely ignores agency. A modern worker, as exploited as they are, has legal rights. You can quit. Yes, it's hard, but you can. You can organize, change careers, call the police. Meanwhile, a slave, even a well-fed one, is a legal asset to the master. Slaves had no right to say no. PG also loves to invoke Maslow's hierarchy to prove that food comes before rights and personhood. This is a horrific category error. Maslow describes the order of personal motivation, what drives an individual's behavior. PG treats it as a ranking of moral importance, as if food matters more, so rights don't matter as much. A slave can't use legal rights to protect their food or their children. A free person can. Rights are not just a higher need. They are the tool that secures all needs, including food. And Maslow himself warned about the well-adjusted slave, someone who adapts to injustice and calls it good. PG is celebrating that adaptation. Reducing human dignity to a full stomach is undermining of being a human in the first place.
Everything we need in life is derived from the land of the earth. It's where we grow our food, drink our water, build our houses, etc. Now, it's also paradoxically the most free resource there is. No human being ever had to lift a finger to create the land of the earth. One thing we can all agree on, however, is that it was not created by another human. So have you ever wondered, then, why is it that we have to pay another human, a landlord in this case, so much damn money to live on something that was created for free?
Yes, the physical planet was not built by humans, but the value of a specific plot of land, especially in a city, is almost entirely created by what surrounds it. Roads, subways, schools, hospitals, jobs, legal systems, sewerage, all built by labor, past and present. A hectare of tundra has almost no market value. A hectare in Manhattan is worth millions, not because the dirt is special, but because millions of people and generations invested their work into that location. PG's argument is like saying, silicon is a free natural resource, so iPhones should be free. No. What matters is the labor that transforms raw nature into useful things. He separates land from infrastructure, and that's the trick to push his narrative.
Now, here's something you may not have known about rental economics. In big urban cities, the overwhelming majority, up to 90% of the rent cost you're paying, is for the land underneath the apartment you're renting and not the apartment itself. This is why if you were to hypothetically teleport that exact same apartment to a rural area out in the middle of nowhere, the rent wouldn't be nearly as expensive. So, this means that if your rent is $4,000 a month in New York, $3,600 of that goes to the value of the land. Society is forcing you to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week to pay for a resource that was created entirely for free. It is the biggest scam and grift in the history of humanity.
This number comes from studies of vacant land or extreme high-density commercial real estate, not from a typical apartment. For most rental housing, the land share is between 20 and 40%, depending on the city. PG takes the most extreme case, a parking lot in Manhattan, and pretends it applies to your one-bedroom apartment. It's a classic trick. Use a shocking number, ignore the context, and hope nobody checks. Even if land value were the main cost, his solution, a land value tax, doesn't automatically lower your rent. Landlords can, and probably will, pass taxes on to tenants if the market allows. And PG never explains how to stop that.
The most common rebuttal to the basic fact of life that land is free is that people used to be a bunch of violent savages unaliving each other over land, and thus the only way to keep the peace and order in society is to force people to pay for it. The biggest problem with this argument, however, is that it's just a political talking point with absolutely no evidence behind it. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that prehistoric hunter-gatherers were any more violent than us modern-day humans. None. Trust me, I've studied this issue very extensively. You'll see that tribes like the Kung, one of the few remaining hunter-gatherer tribes still around today, have homicide rates per 100,000 that are lower than many big American cities. Every anthropologist who has studied them has said they're very peaceful, egalitarian, and cooperative. And there's good reason for this.
This is probably the weakest historical argument in the entire video. The main problem is the leap in logic. PG takes a handful of unusually peaceful societies and quietly turns them into a model for all prehistoric humans. That's gold classic of cherry picking. The Jolmen lived on relatively isolated islands with abundant marine resources and long skeletons with embedded arrowheads, blunt force trauma, massacres, and fortified settlements. So when PG says, there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever, that's lie. There is evidence. Researchers disagree about its interpretation, not its existence. And more importantly, what does this have to do with land taxes and geoism? Even if all hunter-gatherers were peaceful, so what? We don't live in that world anymore. We have 8 billion people piling up, complex supply chains, and cumulative climate change.
Therefore, since all of us contribute to the value of the land, we are all absolutely entitled, yes, entitled to being compensated for it. Even if you're an unemployed young person sitting at home doing nothing all day, you are entitled to it because your human life does have inherent value, whether you work or not. Now, I know that capitalists absolutely hate the idea that human life has inherent value, but this isn't the usual moral argument I'm making here. This is a cold, hard, factual, economic argument.
This is probably the most revealing sentence in the entire video. Notice what just happened. PG quietly equates human dignity with economic contribution. Those are not the same thing. Every human being has inherent moral worth, indeed. Your dignity doesn't depend on your income, and your rights don't disappear because you lose your job. But it simply doesn't follow that society owes you an economic claim simply because you exist. That's a completely different argument. Think about it this way. A newborn baby has infinite human value to its parents. That doesn't mean the baby has already produced economic value. An elderly retired person has exactly the same human dignity as a young engineer. That doesn't mean they create the same economic output. Those are different questions. PG keeps collapsing them into one. Economic systems do not distribute resources according to moral worth. They coordinate scarce resources through production, exchange, incentives, institutions, and cooperation. If you erase that distinction, economics becomes theology. And notice the direction of the message. PG doesn't say, let's help people become more resilient. He doesn't say, let's build stronger communities. He doesn't say, let's create better opportunities. Instead, he tells his audience something psychologically comforting. You already deserve everything simply because you exist. That's emotionally attractive, especially if you're struggling. But it quietly shifts the focus away from agency and toward entitlement. This is the difference between compassion and learned helplessness. Compassion says, you matter, and let's help you stand on your own feet. Learned helplessness says, you don't need to change. The world simply owes you. Those two sound similar, but actually opposites.
We can all agree that properties in big urban city centers are generally far more expensive than in small rural areas. So this means that just by existing, yes, that's right, just by existing, you contribute to population numbers going up, property values going up, rent prices going up. The Japanese government right now is literally giving away properties for free in areas where the low birth rates have turned once vibrant, bustling cities into desolate ghost towns. We see similar programs being offered in Greece and Italy. This means that even newborn babies who are decades away from making any sort of economic contribution in the labor market have already directly and significantly contributed to the values of properties in their surrounding area. Junzi is so lazy. What, you think you should get paid just for existing? Actually, yes. 100% yes.
This one is highly relative to previous, but here, PG makes an elementary economic mistake. He confuses correlation with causation. Yes, larger populations tend to increase land values in cities, because more people compete for limited space, and because cities concentrate infrastructure, jobs, and services. But the causal mechanism is not existence. It's effective demand. The combination of population and purchasing power, institutions, property rights, and investment. A starving person in a slum exists. Does that raise land values? No. So, what's the difference? The difference is economic infrastructure. Jobs, credit markets, legal systems, transport networks, all created by labor, not by existence. PG's argument would imply that a country with a high birth rate, say Tanzania, should have skyrocketing land prices. It doesn't. Land there is cheap because there's no productive economy. What he's doing is taking the specific case of already prosperous high-investment cities and attributing their land values to just population. The real driver of land value is productivity and agglomeration, which depend on centuries of accumulated labor and capital.
By the way, quick side note, a Geoism land value tax into a universal basic income is also so ingenious because it almost accidentally solves two major problems we always see with the modern capitalist system. Number one, capital flight, aka the rich will just leave if you tax them. Since we're taxing the land itself, they can leave all they want, but they can't take the land underneath their properties onto the plane with them. And number two, won't your rent just go up by $1,000 if you get a $1,000 universal basic income? Once again, since we're taxing the land itself, which is responsible for most of the cost of rent, if your rent were to go up, your universal basic income would go up as well, making this an entirely self-correcting issue.
This might be the most magical sentence in the entire video. Listen carefully. PG says rising rents automatically solve themselves because UBI rises too. But how? UBI is a fixed amount, say $1,000 per month. Rent can go up by $2,000. Who decides to increase the UBI? The same government that PG claims is wasteful and corrupt. And how often? Every month? Every year? A land value tax can certainly generate public revenue. Nobody disputes that. The real question is whether that additional revenue actually keeps pace with rising housing costs for everyone. Those are completely different claims. Land values don't rise evenly. Cities grow at different speeds. Neighborhoods change. Governments reassess land values on different schedules. Tax revenues fluctuate. Political priorities change. None of that is automatic. And then comes the second problem. Suppose everyone's disposable income increases because of UBI. What stops sellers and landlords from responding to that higher purchasing power? That's one of the oldest questions in economics. PG never addresses it. He simply assumes the system settles into a stable equilibrium, an assumption. To be clear, a land value tax in Georgism has a strong point. Many economists support versions of it. But saying land value tax exists is very different from saying land value tax automatically eliminates housing insecurity. That second claim requires evidence. What's left in the end? As I said before, PG has a big credit at describing the pain. Rent is staggering. Work often sucks, even if you'd be able to get it. Young people feel trapped. Where me and PG part ways is the prescription. His answer is essentially, a system changes to come up and fix all economical challenges. In my previous video, I talked about two very different ideas of freedom. Freedom from obligation means nobody owns you. Nobody is entitled to your loyalty. Nobody gets to dictate your life. That's a valuable idea. But when you take it to its extreme, it quietly becomes something very different. Freedom from responsibility. The freedom to not act. Wait forever for someone else to take risk and fix things. I don't think that's freedom, rather than helplessness. I think real freedom begins the moment you become capable of solving at least part of your own problems. That's why I'm interested in something much less glamorous. Semi-autonomy concept I'm proposing. Learning useful skills, building local networks, worker cooperatives, community land trusts, mutual aid, diversifying income, reducing dependence on debt, platforms, and centralized institutions. None of these are magic silver bullets. None of them fix everything. But each one gives you a little more leverage. And enough small sources of leverage eventually become real freedom. PG teaches people how to explain why they're stuck and who's to blame. I'd rather teach people how to become harder to trap. If that sounds interesting, stick around and contact me. Thanks for watching. And if you think I got something wrong, tell me why in the comments.